Hi, class. My name is Dr. Rusty Nolan Graham, and I'll be the instructor for the rest of this course. We've had a couple of issues with the leaning of the book and some of the materials coming out, and I'm going to take full responsibility for those choices. I picked the book without completely reading it. It was just the most current book out in our subject field, and they lean very, very left. Again, that's on me and no one else. So we only have about 2 weeks left. So how do we effectively teach you public policy analysis? I like to take a step back and actually look at the entire public policy process. So this week we're going to talk about an overview of public policy. The model we're going to use is the CDC model for policy development. A few times you're going to see in these PowerPoints it's going to talk about health, and we may use the health examples. But this can be used in any area. Because often we're changing policies as a leader. We're going to be changing our agency's policies to better serve our community and to address real problems. Okay? And think about it. Every year or so, we're putting all of our policies out and reviewing them. So this is just something that as an administrator, you're going to be doing at a pretty good rate. Okay? Now, the public policy process. First of all, you're going to notice in this model, it is a circle. First thing, problem identification. Policies don't exist unless there's a problem they're trying to address. Like I said, when we start any new academy, we almost have no rule book because we don't know the problems we're going to run into. When you have any new organization, you don't know the problems that you're going to run into until you're actually into it. When you're out trying to solve the world's problems, you can break them down to smaller problems. So I want you to look at everything as looking at the very first step of problem identification itself. Then you're going to do a policy analysis. You're actually going to see what your policy could do, what it cannot do. You're going to actually figure out what's actually going on. You're going to actually then get into strategy and policy development. We're going to actually write that policy. Okay? And then we're going to try to get that policy enacted. In the last steps, policy implementation, actually getting it out there and actually having things happen. You're going to notice in this model, like everything else in public service, there's constant evaluation. And you're also going to notice at the middle of it is always stakeholders. The reason stakeholders are so important is they're the ones that are actually going to implement the policy. They're the ones, for example, that if you make a seatbelt policy at your organization, they're the ones that have to wear the seatbelt. If you make a seatbelt law in your area, they're the ones that have to actually wear it. If you have this no smoking in your agency, no tobacco use, they're the ones that have to actually do it. So you're going to have to create that buy-in. Okay? This is not a world where we can simply make rules and pray to God they're going to follow. So what is problem identification? If we go back to the very basics of what we're trying to solve here, we have to not just say, well, I think this is the problem. We need to do a little bit of research and find the root cause of the problem. Okay? If we go out and we say that the problem is, example, underage drunk driving amongst teenagers. Well, what's the root problem? Is it the driving or is it the alcohol? You got to develop a detailed problem statement that includes the problem's effect on that group. Okay? You may actually want to look more professional. For example, you may create a policy dealing with what the department will wear. So it's actually going through and figuring out what your policy is actually going to address. What problem are you addressing? Why is problem identification important? You need to make sure that you're identifying the true underlying problem causing the issue. Because sometimes it's just not obvious. Sometimes we have our own view on things and we don't quite understand what's really going on. So how do you identify the problem? You identify the root cause of the problem by collecting information and then talking to the stakeholders. First thing, you're going to go out, starting by an environmental scan. This is by nothing more than looking at the actual group, the organization that you're going to deal with, the people you want to deal with. Actually look at them in their natural environment and see what's actually going on. Then doing a literature review. What's happening in other communities? You know, you may have to develop a policy for the procedures that a lifeguard is going to use. But you're going to go back and you're going to actually do a literature review of what other groups have used in the past. At the end, you're also probably going to survey the community. If you don't have buy-in, there's no real reason to do it. Okay? You're going to develop your problem statement. Describe how the problem occurs, how serious it is. If it's not a serious problem, are we even creating a policy? Probably not. and its outcomes and impacts. Every time this problem happens, how bad does it actually affect the organization? Okay. Doing this can also help you identify any gaps in the data you've gathered. The problem statement you develop might include who is affected by the situation, how big is the problem itself, what contributes to the problem. Sometimes by asking what contributes to the problem, you may find your root cause by going, wait, that's actually what's going on here. Then also, where and when and where the problem is most likely to occur. Finding out those pieces of information is critical for identifying the problem itself. Who should you involve in problem identification? Real world advice before you get started with this. Start with who you know. Okay? You can identify potential stakeholders by networking with your existing partners. A lot of times, if you're going to be a chief officer of an agency and you're having to make some policy changes, first of all, you're probably going to ask your own command staff. You're probably going to ask the command staff of a few agencies around you, some of your personal friends. You're probably going to go in and you might talk to the city attorney. Those are the people you're going to be working with. You may talk to some of the officers that that are friends. But look at this. Many stakeholders are involved in the policy process. Stakeholders are people or groups closely affected by or concerned with the problem or interested in policy solutions for it. Okay? Talking with stakeholders is going to help you a couple of ways. They're going to help you identify the true underlying problem. They're going to probably already have some time in on this. This has already been bothering. You're going to find out leaders a lot of times have something that nags them. And when they get together, they start talking about it and they start to figure out, hey, I have this problem in my organization. Well, this is what we did, and here's the outcome that we had. Another person may jump in and say, well, here's what we did, and here's our outcome. Problems are unique to their context. So you will probably have to talk with several different stakeholders to get the full picture, believe it or not. Anytime I have a problem, I talk to everybody that was in the room, trying to figure out what actually happened. So let's jump into the next question. Who's your possible stakeholders? Those who are affected by the policy, directly or indirectly. If it's going to be a departmental policy, how are the troops on the ground going to feel about it? Okay? Those directly involved with or responsible for the policy. How would those that actually have to enforce the policy going to, feel about it? What information can they bring to us? People whose lives or jobs might be affected by the policy or any part of the policy process. Anybody that's going to be involved, it's going to cost them something personal or professional to talk to them. Okay? I'm also going to, depending on how large the problem is, I may be bringing in outside community members and leaders. I may be going to neighborhood associations. Probably what I'm going to go to is my professional associations. We all belong to different agencies. Those with strong influence in our community. A lot of times when it's a huge policy, you're going to go to people who you trust. Okay? Your state and local agencies. There's nothing wrong with talking to other agencies that are going to be dealing with you. No offense, there is no reason that a neighboring agency should ever be surprised by a policy you're getting ready to put out. You're also going to realize that anytime you're changing policies or procedures, you're going to have interest groups. You're going to have businesses that want to do business with you, activists who are passionate one way or the other. Think about some of them right now, the policies over student loans. There's people screaming on both sides of it. Okay? For us, there may be, again, thinking about the police, thinking about when you're having to change some of your policies, your chase policy, for example, you may have activists going both directions. You're also going to have academics, people who are actually out there like me, who have been studying the field for 15, 25 years, who will be able to give you some information. You're also going to be talking to people who could provide funding and other resources. You're going to talk to some, and now again, this came from the healthcare field, so schools, educational groups. You're going to be looking at, this one jumped over and it's a double repeat. I apologize. Funders and other resource providers. Think about it. You're always going to need twice as much resources that you could get. Evaluators who are going to actually be looking at where the policy is working or not. Anytime you're also doing stakeholders, remember when you're creating a policy, you're not in a vacuum. There's going to be legislators, government officials, and other policymakers that are going to be affected by your decisions, and they're often going to want at least an opportunity to speak to you. Okay? So how do you know you've successfully completed problem identification? You collect the information about the problem by combining existing research and information from your shareholders, and you collected new data from the community if you needed it. You've talked to all the stakeholders. Do not create a policy that the boots on the ground don't know is coming. Okay? Because that's going to earn you distrust. Don't create a policy without community input, because then you're going to have people who are activists coming and causing issues. Okay? Make sure that all stakeholders are been talked to. The data you collect identifies the root cause of the problem and provides a complete picture of it. Your problem statement should include who is affected, how big the problem is, what contributes to the problem, when and where the problem is most likely to occur. Then you finally frame the problem in a way that illuminates possible policy solutions. Okay? When we have actually created this problem statement correctly, built it all the way out, and framed it, we're going to start to see possible solutions to our problem. Okay? So what is policy analysis? Now, policy analysis is the process of identifying potential policy options that could address your problem and then comparing those options to choose the most effective, efficient, and feasible one. Okay? Why is policy analysis important? Conducting a policy analysis ensures you have gone through a systematic process to choose the best policy option that may be best for your situation. If we go through a process to actually look at each of the possible policies, then we'll come out with the best one. When we shoot from the hip, we're going to cause additional problems we didn't plan on. Okay? Now, who should be involved in your policy analysis? Okay, first of all, first group over here, starting at the left, the people who can provide or interpret information about the policy. Again, looking at subject matter experts. So who is a subject matter expert? A lot of times, these are your equals in other similar organizations. These might be contacting your local college and finding the person who teaches the leadership program there, or what area you're going to get into. If it's a policy on anything like hazmat, you're probably going to want to call in an agency that actually has some hazmat control. Economists, because every policy you ever do will have monetary compensation. At least talk to the financial director of the organization. Again, talk to your community partners. We are not in a vacuum. Talk to the other groups around you, and they'll be able to help you. They might be able to look at information and give you feelings about what's going on. Okay? The second group of people affected by the policy. These are people whose jobs or lives might be affected by the policy. Some more community members, community partners, and local decision makers. They're going to be able to give you some of the contextual knowledge, such as potential social, educational, and cultural perspective. More importantly, these are the people, if their lives depend on it, these are the people that work for this organization. These are the people that we need to make sure understand why we're doing what we're doing. Okay? And everything goes at the local level. Your policies that make the national news were decided within the organization. Okay? Stop and frisk is a great example. Okay? Your policy on how you do on the fire side, how you do a fire inspection, how you deal with the public. Those are policies that you, again, are going to talk to people because it's going to affect their livelihood. People who administer resources related to the policy, public officials and administrators. Okay? We're going to be talking to them because we need to make sure that if we're creating a new policy, is there actually money to support it? Great example, a simple little ask saying, we're going to create a policy that says we're going to have 2 people on every apparatus going out the door. If the town does not have the money to actually pay for that second person, you may have those 2 people for half the year that have no funding for the second half of the year. If you're going to change the lettering on your police car, for example, if you just go out and change it, you create a new policy. This is the colors we want. This is what we want it to say. If you don't have the financial resources in there, you're going to cause problems. Or it may be a term that the city doesn't want to use. Okay? These people here are going to be able to talk to you also about the legal landscape. Okay? They're going to explain to you the political landscape and say, hey, listen, we might need to slow down just a little bit. Here's what you haven't thought about yet. How to conduct a policy analysis. Okay. Research and identify possible policy options. Hey, is there anything wrong with actually getting out there and looking at other departments' policies to see if they work for you? There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. You can review literature on it. You can do an environmental scan of your own organization. You can actually do a survey within your own organization. Sometimes creating a new policy, sending out the survey to the people actually in the organization lets them feel like they're part of the process. Describe the possible policy options. As you conduct your policy analysis, pay attention to the political impact. Okay? Again, everything comes back to politics and money. Okay? Cost of implementation, the feasibility of each option. Describe these three factors. You can ask yourself when your stakeholders question is, what population will be affected by each policy option? How much and when? Okay? What's the context around the possible policy options, including political history, environmental and policy debate? This may sometimes be something you want to be active in, and you want to create a policy to address this issue. And sometimes they're going to tell you, hey, hands off, slow down. There's issues with it. Okay? You're also going to look at the cost benefit associated with each policy option from a budgetary perspective. There's policies out there where we can actually make people completely safe by taking away every single freedom. If I sit you in a chair and seatbelt you into it and feed you and take care of you and let you do nothing, you're going to live. Okay? Guaranteed. If I let you go out and do other things, there's a chance you're going to get hurt. Every option I'll give you a better one here. I can guarantee almost no fires in the area. We can sprinkle every building. I can put a fire department on every street corner. I can have fire wardens out walking. I can pay for the best fire alarm systems in the world. I can have exceptional education to explain to every one of the citizens in the community. And the problem is I can't afford it. Everybody, and this is one of the hardest things we teach in intro to fire protection, is the idea that we accept risk when we don't do everything that we can. When you're assessing feasibility, it's important to identify any barriers that could prevent a policy from being developed and actually implemented. A policy might be more feasible in one city or at a certain time, but not in others. You might find that as circumstances changes, what is considered affordable or publicly acceptable may change from time to time. To be realistic, it depends. There are great financial years and there are poor financial years. In great financial years, we're willing to go out, we're willing to put more money behind policies, making changes. When there are leaner years, we're more likely to try to not do anything. Or we may create a policy. This is done a lot through the feds. They'll actually give us an unfunded mandate where we have to change the way we do business. We can provide us no funding for it. Okay? Rank the possible policy options and pick the one you think is best. Compare the policy options for the health impact, the economic and budgetary impact, and feasibility. Next, basically, we're going to rank each option. Okay? We can actually put out the options. Sometimes, if there is a low risk policy, why not let everybody in the group vote? Have a popularity contest on it. Okay? We want to make sure that, we need to make sure that there's always something. We know there's going to be some subjectivity in here. Okay, we know there's no such thing as a perfect policy. Okay, we want to have a strong positive impact on the direction we want it to go, and it's economically feasibly viable. Okay, now, for example, they give you the one about smoking. Okay, we need to make sure that there's a couple ways they handled smoking, even in our time period. They actually created smoking sections, and they made smoking outlawed in public situations. They've gone in, they've changed the age for actually being able to purchase tobacco. They've actually increased taxes on tobacco products over and over and over, trying to get people to stop smoking. Okay, so we're getting ready next to ask ourselves the key questions that you have to do during policy analysis. Okay, what is the policy level? Okay, is it legislative? Is it administrative, regulatory, or other? Is this coming down from our council at the local level, our city council, or our county commission? Is this coming down administratively from from within an organization, a chief officer, a city manager? Is this regulatory? Is this something the state has mandated upon us that we have to do? What level of government institutions will implement? Okay, which level of government? Well, is this a local problem that we'll be dealing with, or is this a department problem we'll be dealing with? Okay, how does the policy work operate? Is it mandatory? Will enforcement be necessary? Will you actually have to put in punishment for violation of the policy? How are you going to fund a policy? If you can't find funding for it, you're going to have issues with it. Who's actually responsible for administering the policy? A lot of times, for a city, is it your local safety manager? Is it your town clerk? Is it someone in the city's attorney's office? Could it come out of the police department? You know, those are things you have to look at. Okay, what are the objectives of the policy? When we write policy, we have to have a clear objective of what we're trying to do. What is the legal landscape behind the policy? Let's jump back to objectives for a second. If our policy is not lined up to eliminate the problems that we're actually trying to address, we probably need to look at it and change that policy right away. What's the legal landscape surrounding the policy? Is there court ruling? Is it constitutional issues? Is it public sway at this point? You know, a lot of times we change our chase policies after a traumatic accident or usually it's chase policies or stop and frisking. Okay, what's the historical context behind this policy issue? Okay, has this policy been debated before? If it was, think about it. If it was put down, if it was stopped before, find out why it was stopped before you put a lot of effort into it. It's going to most likely come back to that same problem again. What are the experiences of other jurisdictions? When you put in a uniform policy for a department, did it go well for a neighboring jurisdiction? Did it go well nationally? Okay. What's the added value of the policy? If there is no added value, why are we doing it? What are the expected short, immediate, and long-term outcomes for that policy? What will we see day one change? Okay. Great examples in the telecommunications system center. Once the medical director makes a change to the call cards, it's immediately, and their policy changes. Okay. For us, you know, we may have a policy over, let's go with something easy, overtime. We may have a policy for the short time saying we shall have no overtime. And we may have another policy at some other point saying we have mandatory overtime. Okay, so what's the expected long and short term of the policies? Think about if we have a tobacco-free policy. What's the short term and long term effects of that? Okay, what might be the unintended positive or negative consequences of the policy? A lot of times when you create a policy, there's going to be other policies that are adjacent to it that are going to be changed. You might also find out that by being the first agency to pick up a new policy, you may draw more people to you. Great example, when the fire departments first started had a policy where they could wear shorts. The departments that wore shorts were getting younger firefighters because they wanted to wear shorts. I know that sounds silly, but that's kind of, we didn't plan on it happening, but all of a sudden we saw people come in and said, hey, I can wear shorts. Okay, criteria questions. How does the policy address the problem or issue? Does it increase access or protection from exposure? Okay. What are the magnitude, reach, and distribution of benefits and burdens? Okay. What populations will benefit? How much and when? What populations will be negatively impacted? Again, you're going to have winners and losers in every policy. Think about how much each one is moving. Is there disparities in the way that this policy is going to impact people? Okay. Are there gaps in your data and evidence when you gather it? Because think about it, at some point you may be questioned and you need to be able to actually address how you made that determination. Remember, half of our career will be spent defending policies we created. Policy analysis key questions continuing on. Feasibility. We're looking at political. What are the current political forces, including political history, the environment policy debate? I know you got bogged down in a book that leaned left, but I want you to think at the local level. While there is still the Republican the Democrats, you're now going to throw on a new level of context here. What is the level of impact on the people in those positions? It's not a question of Republican Democrats much as who are the 5 to 7 people sitting in your commissioners meeting? How have they voted? What have they said? Where are they standing on issues? That's going to be your political pull one way or the other. Who are those stakeholders? Who are your supporters and opponents? What are their interests and values? If you can identify why the other side of an issue has an issue with your policy, you can probably address it in that policy so that they understand why you're doing it, and it may end up them not fighting you so hard. Okay? What are the potential social, educational, and cultural perspectives associated with policy option? Think about this. There's times when there is you're right to change a habit. Okay? There's a lack of knowledge in certain areas of why we're doing this. A lot of times you want to take care of some of these issues. Have an educational moment with your people as you're doing your surveys. This is what I want to do. Fear of change. I know a lot of people have to deal with fear of change, and we just have to address it. What's the potential impact on the policy on other sectors of high priority issues? What other policies are important that might take precedent over your policy you're working on? Okay. Now, getting down to operation. What are the resources, capacity, and technical needs for developing, enacting, and implementing the policy? Sometimes you may have the greatest idea for a policy ever, but if you don't have the ability to bring that policy to effect at that moment, if you don't have the technical ability to do it, sometimes it's better to put it to the side or bring it into staged pieces. Okay. How much time is needed for the policy to be enacted, implemented, and enforced? Again, think about this. When we're creating a policy, we need to understand there's a time period. We can't expect everybody on day one to follow a policy perfect every time. And it's kind of hard for us in the public safety sector because, right, the policy change, clearly you should know. Well, there's people on vacation. There's people who have done their job the same way for 25 years. You've got to give them time to get over to act in a new way. Okay. So we're talking about making sure that they have time to do it. And then we have to come up with policy changes. Here's the date. Here's the date you can no longer file the other one at all. And here's the date we start to enforce it. Okay. Same as if you change times for people to work. That first week, there's going to be some flexibility as people are getting themselves adjusted. Okay. How scalable, flexible, and transferable is the policy? If the policy is not scalable, it's a policy just for one department within an organization itself, then, and it won't work anywhere else, it's probably not worth being something we look at the whole organization level. It may just be a department policy. I have several department policies in this department that are not carried on throughout the college. A great policy is scalable throughout an organization. It is flexible. We do not need a policy that is so rigid that it ties my hands to where I have to let a good employee go. Okay. And economical budgetary impact. I know we've talked a lot about money. What are the costs and benefits associated with the policy from a budgetary perspective? Think about it. For the public sectors, we always have only so much money in a pot. And it actually is always cute when people say, but you work for the state, you can pull more money. I say, out of what? There's no thin air money coming through. Okay. How to cost compare to benefits. We're always looking at cost savings, cost averted, return on investment, cost effectiveness, and cost benefit analysis. Looking at a policy, seeing how much it's going to cost up front to go to it. And if we say we're going to create a uniform policy for a department for a second, what's the actual cost of us actually uniforming the people the first time? If it's in a year where I have no money, probably not going to go with it. Probably going to let it slide to the side for a little bit. Even though we all know looking professionals is very important. Also, how are the cost benefits distributed? And what's the timeline for cost and benefits? Okay. So how do you know when you're finally finished with this? Okay. You've researched and identified possible policy options with literature review, environmental scan, and survey of best practices. Again, our best practices is the way we actually do our business. We're actually getting out there and we're actually finding out from our professional associations what policies they suggest. Okay. Also from our department heads and from people in other fields similar to ours. You've described possible policy options, including each one's political impact, cost of implementation, and feasibility. I wish I could tell you that we always went there with the best policy every time. No, we go with the most acceptable policy every time. You rank each policy based on the health impact, the economic, budgetary impact, and feasibility, and choose the one you think is best for your situation. Again, they're not going to, you're never going to be able to please everybody, so don't worry about that. The policy is going to anger someone if it's a good policy. If everybody's happy, then it's not really a policy. What is strategy and policy development? Strategy and policy development involves planning how to develop, draft, prepare for enactment of your policy. Why is it so important? Creating a strategy and drafting the policy can help you make the policy option you select actionable. So you've selected a policy option. Now you've got to make it actionable. Now you have to put the pieces in there. And this process is going to actually change depending on the type of policy you're actually working on. Okay. There's going to be other pieces to it. Who should be involved in strategy and policy development? Okay. You're going to need the help of stakeholders. Again, this is something, if you want to go far in any organization, you're going to have all the stakeholders on. You're going, even though there's going to be a voice of dissent, you're going to have them with you. Process isn't always straightforward. Consider which stakeholders help you develop a strategy and draft a policy. Also plan who should be involved in moving it forward. Now, here's where you have to again ask those stakeholders what can help you or prevent you from enacting your policy. Okay. They have the inside information. Let's go with it. Okay. There's two types of people right here. People who can help design your strategy. People whose jobs or lives might be affected by the policy, your community members and leaders, your subject matter experts, people who understand the legislative process. Again, the people who can write a policy. Okay. Now, they're the ones who are going to be out there pushing. They're going to develop your communication strategies and materials. They're going to identify and connect you with key contacts and partners, and they're going to figure out clear next steps. They're the strategic part of it. They're going to make sure that your policy is ready to be sold. The second part over here, they're going to help develop the policy. They're the subject matter experts you're going to see, people who understand the legislative process. They're going to provide critical information for the policy, and they may help you write sections of it. Okay. How do you define your policy, your strategy, and develop your policy? To develop your enactment strategy, identify the steps you and your partners will take to enact the policy. Now, stakeholders are very important in this step. Your policy involves writing a new policy. Your stakeholders will know, usually from past experiences, the best contacts and partners who can help guide your policy through the appropriate process. Okay? Now, at a department, you may only have just your regular team, the fire chief, police chief, EMS chief, your emergency management director, maybe the only person has to sign off on. Okay. In the end, it may be a citywide policy that you've been put in charge of, or it may be a policy for an organization that's countywide. Okay. Ask these people who have been there before you. They can also help you with timing of the policy. They can help you, hey, don't try to get this policy out in December. Nobody's going to pay attention. There's some holidays there. Don't take this policy out this time of year because people won't think it's offensive. Okay? Don't take it out this time of year. There's an anniversary of something very bad that happened to this city or this county, and we just don't want to discuss it. Okay? Development and drafting the policy. Start by trying to find pre-existing language for the policy. You can also, model policy or policies others have drafted. You might be able to get your destination by a well-traveled route. Now, a lot of times when you're changing small policies, they're going to be pre-written. Other cities may have them. There's nothing wrong with taking another city's policy if it's working, as long as it will work for your organization, and drafting it in. Okay? When I went to create this PowerPoint, I didn't go to reinvent the wheel. I first looked at your book and what it had, and I realized that was not adequate. So I was like, I need to find an agency that creates a lot of policies. And right now, no one creates more than the CDC. Some about some virus. As a policy is drafted, consider how it might work in your situation where additional information or resources may be needed for implementation. As a manager, you're going to often use pre-created documents. Okay? There's nothing wrong with it. Use them to the best of your ability. Read them. Have your committee read them. Make sure that the right city's on there. Make sure that the right dates are on there. And actually ask the people you're borrowing the policy from, did it work for them? A valuable time to ask. How do you know you have successfully completed strategy and policy development? Strategy. Your strategy identifies the steps for policy enactment. You now have a plan, a pathway to get this from on your desk to post it at work where it's going to actually happen. You're going to also identify who. A lot of times it's going to be a who that can help you. If you have somebody at your organization that their word carries enough weight that people are going to trust them, that's a good person to go to, have them help you. Also, that same person, somebody that's likely to prevent it or be that negative source, go to them. Help reassure them, help get them to be your ally. Policy development. You've researched and considered model policies. The policy is drafted and clearly shows how it will work in the real world. You identified any additional information or resources that you may need that's actually needed for implementation. You've actually done the hard part of the job. You've done the work that's going into it. Okay. What is policy enactment? Policy enactment involves getting official permission or the green light to implement a policy. Policies can be enacted at multiple organizational levels, from school districts to federal agencies. For us, it could be a policy that's enacted within a department of ecology, at the college, all the way up to the college and the school. There may be a policy for the police department, the fire department, the EMS agency, or it might be a countywide policy. We've gotten the official go to go for. Why is policy enactment important? You can't implement a policy that has not been officially authorized. I'm going to give you a real world example from the fire service. The 2012 fire code, when it was supposed to be adopted, had an issue. We sent all the copies of the policy, all the policies and the codes and everything out. Everything was good to go. Except there is a policy that states when you can use that book. And that policy book had not been written yet and had not been passed by the state legislature. So all the technical codes, fire, plumbing, electrical, and all that were out. There was actually inspectors getting ready to start using it. And we were waiting on the regulatory book that comes with it. And that book didn't come. Okay. We have to make sure that the authorizing body, the approving agency, the approving person, if it's a department, when the department head has signed off on it. If it's not, then it's not a policy. Okay. Who's involved in policy and federal state government agencies? They often design and issue regulations and reporting requirements. Okay. Legislators. This group includes elected federal, state, and local representatives, mayors and state representatives who pass laws and oversee the budget process. These are the ones that are going to pass it at the local level. Public officials and administrators, they actually coordinate the implementation of the policy. They may write it. Okay. State and local agencies themselves, they have the authority to issue permits and regulations. They're going to be following policies. These are all the different groups that can be actually out there affected by it. How are policies enacted? Policy enactment consists of following the procedures necessary for enacting the policy and getting official approval for implementation. There is actually going to be a policy. You will find it's usually policy 1.1 that states how policies are created. Okay? If it's not, it's in the back. To understand the enactment process, you'll probably need the help of stakeholders because it isn't always straightforward. Sometimes the process is more complex and the nuances than the official steps on paper. For example, school board agendas can be difficult to navigate if you haven't gone through the process before. I'll tell you this, city council meetings are hard to navigate if you've never done the process before. There's going to be for a fact, in Alexander County, for example, we're getting ready to create a burn facility there. there's going to be policies and procedures that have to be created for that building. We will take some of them from Catawba County that's already been created and drafted, but we'll take them over there because we're going to have approval from their people. Just because it was approved in Catawba County, I can't immediately take it over to Alexander County, even though the same agency is going to be holding it. You can get into a situation like where you have an agency that has authority in 2 counties, and they may have 2 different sets of policies, which could cause a little bit of trouble. So there are a lot of different ways there. Now, real world advice on this. Policy enactment can be repetitive, and sometimes it's a slow process. You better believe it's going to be slow. And it might require multiple attempts because they may want you to rewrite something. You may find a commissioner that refuses to sign off on it, a manager that's refusing to enforce it until it's actually fixed. Think about this: seatbelt laws took forever to happen. Riding the back of the tailboard, getting rid of it, took a while. Different ways that you arrest people, different procedures you have, they've been modified. And the EMS agencies, your protocols and procedures are changed. And there's different processes every time. There's different organizations that you have to make sure that you've gone through all the loops correctly. Okay. Now, here's the good part. How do you know policy enactment has been completed? The policy has been authorized. We've got to the end, right? Well, not quite. Just because we got to enactment, we have not yet finished our process. At this point, you're tired of me talking. I'm sure I am. So what is policy implementation? Enactment alone doesn't ensure a policy will be successful. Additional steps may be needed to implement the policy in a way that can increase the likelihood the policy will achieve its intended outcome. Okay? First step you got to do. Okay? You got to do organizational and stakeholders. You got to educate the people in the organizations affected by the new policy. You have to explain to them why it's actually happening and explain to them why the policy actually works better. Okay? You're going to have to change some of your administrative operations and systems or create entirely new systems that's never existed before because the policy has changed. Okay? You've got to monitor and enforce the policy as needed. So let's take this back to an issue that nobody's talking about this week, student loans. Every time we've had a policy change, the administrative operations had to change. And every time you do an operations change, you lose information. I don't care what system you're going to. You drop something across the way and you don't find out about it till later on. Or you may have created a policy that actually creates 2 new problems you never thought about. Now, if you create this policy, I want you to make sure that you're monitoring it. If you create a policy and put it on paper and you do not enforce it, you don't have a policy. You have a problem that's coming back for you legally. Why is policy implementation important? Policies won't work if the process stops at enactment. What's a law? It's only a law once it's actually been implemented. Okay? Who can play a part in policy implementation? There's a wide range of people in organizations that can be involved in policy implementation, depending on their level of enactment, from local to national, okay? And the type of policy, from regulation to statute. As you implement the policy, stakeholders can help in a couple of different ways. They can identify and coordinate resources and support. For example, one of your partners may coordinate or develop educational or communication activities. If you're leading a nonprofit, there's a very good chance that somebody at that organization is passionate about social media. They're going to be the ones pushing it out on social media. You're going to have people in there that, if you're going to be effective, changing that policy to multiple languages so people understand what's going on, getting that message out. Okay? Now, they might also support for large scale change. They might set websites with information and implementation guidelines. They might be helping get that out. Nowadays with social media, it's getting out a lot quicker, a lot faster. Plan for policy, programmatic, and fiscal sustainability. Okay? Another partner, if you're doing this as an organization, may be looking for more money to continue the policy going forward. Believe it or not, funds run out for things after a while because people have now gotten used to the policy that's no longer really being debated, and now there's no funding. Okay? Nonprofits live in a world of gathering money and partnerships to survive. While planning for implementation, how can you increase the likelihood of achieving the policy's intended outcomes? If you keep the desired outcome in mind, before implementation starts, everyone needs to be clear about the goals of the policy. This is just like a personal change you're making. You have to keep it, you have to monitor it. Okay, what is the goal? How am I going to get there? Okay, identify resources that can help you implement the policy. This can include necessary funding, staffing, and infrastructure. If you're a nonprofit, have to actually, you may actually have to go through and make sure that you have the funding to pay people to help you with this. I want you also to define who is involved and who does what during implementation. If you don't have a game plan, it's going to get very messy at this point. Make sure they know their roles and responsibilities. Specifically, you want to identify the individual or organization that will lead implementation of the policy. If that's not clearly in the policy itself or a procedural manual, you might as well throw it out the window. If somebody's going to pick up a policy, it's just going to cause them problems. Roles and responsibilities of partners and stakeholders. Opportunities and processes for collaboration. Nowadays, we don't sit in a world where each department looks at each other. We now sit in a world where we all work together. And it's very important to make sure we're doing that. Now, we also want to we're going to look at current policy to ensure they are not in conflict with the new policy. There may have been something changed, and all of a sudden, our new policy is actually going to be in conflict with another one. Now, a lot of times you can find this. You have two policies that actually are causing problems for each other. That's just a way we mean to make sure there's no conflict. So constantly you're having to review. Now, how do you know when you successfully plan for policy implementation? People involved in the implementation of the policy understand its goals. You identify the inputs and resources you use to implement the policy. You document the roles and responsibilities of those involved in implementation of policy. Okay, here's the deal you really need to know. Real world advice. After implementation, resources and other supports from stakeholders may decrease. Policy sustainability benefits from planning for these changes. Plan from the beginning that there's going to be a people slowly leading the way, money slowly leading. Plan for sustainability can involve programmatic, administrative, fiscal, and other key elements. Make sure if you're creating a policy, there's going to be some financial support for it. Guys, there's no such thing as a perfect policy. We're always reminded. It's a process that never stops. So that brings us to our last piece of information on this. The process never ends. Just like education, this process never ends. We are redefining what a good policy looks like, okay? So next week, we're going to look at policy evaluation. I want to thank you guys for not giving up and for quitting in this class. It's not been perfect. If you have any questions, I'm going to be around, okay? Now, we're going to look at policy evaluation next week. We're going to really look at policy evaluation. We'll look at the policies or problems that you've identified and the stakeholders we can actually look at. And I'm going to pull some real world policy. We're going to have a discussion. We're also going to have a real discussion on politics and how to make sure that our policies and our policy analysis survives that process. Again, I want to thank you for your time. If you have any questions, just shoot me an email. Have a great day, guys.